All right, so we are moving on into our last MT, which will be covering a little bit of evolution and natural selection. But usually, before we start that one, we get into the idea of taxonomy. Because with natural selection, we're looking at the change of a species over time. In order to understand how species change, we have to understand what exactly a species is and is not. And that comes down to the idea of taxonomy. There is a note page to take along with this video like before. So if you need to pause the video and go into Canvas and pull up that note page, again, I suggest having it side by side, so opening two screens on your computer and putting it so that you can see both of them at the same time. So taxonomy is the classification of organisms. It was created by this guy named Linnaeus. Here you can see his pretty sweet, fabulous profile picture here. Pretty fantastic looking man. He came up with this idea of breaking down organisms into a classification system so that no matter if you are a scientist in the United States, in Japan, or somewhere in Europe, if you use a scientific name here or anywhere else, people will know exactly what species you are talking about. Because when we use slang terms like a brown spider here might look very different than a brown spider in Australia that's probably gigantic in the size of your hand. So instead of just using general terms for organisms, we have this taxonomy classification system to truly organize them. So there is a breakdown. It starts with domain, and that is the biggest category. There's 3 different domains we'll touch base on here in a little bit. We can break domains down into kingdoms, kingdoms into phylum, phylum into classes, classes to order, orders to families, families to genus, and genus to species. This does break them down from largest to smallest, or from most general to most specific. You can kind of see in this diagram over here, all these animals are in the same domain, Eukarya. But then when we get into Animalia, we take out some of those fungus and the plants. And then when we get to the phylum Chordata, those are the ones with a backbone. That is going to narrow it down even more, okay, because all of your insects are not necessarily going to have a backbone. Then we get to the class Mammalia. We keep narrowing it down more into the order, into the family, into the genus, the species. So something might be in the same family, like black bears and panda bears are in the same family, but panda bears are not in the same genus as the black bears that we have in Michigan. Okay? Polar bears and black bears are in the same genus. They are not the same species. So a black bear and a polar bear can't get together and have offspring. It also, again, goes from most general to most specific. So I always like to explain this and think of it as like location where you live. So for example, I live in the United States. That could be my domain. My kingdom could be I live in the Midwest. From there, I could say I live in Michigan. From there, I could say I live in West Michigan. From there, I could say I live in the Grand Rapids area. From there, I could say I live in Walker. From there, I could narrow it down to what street I live on. And then from there, I could narrow it down to what house. So these are all things that are true about me, about the location I am in. But as we go from domain to species, we get more and more specific. So to help us remember this, we use a mnemonic. So the one I've always learned is, did King Philip come over for great soup? So you've got the letters from each of those in order. So on your notes, take a moment. Again, mine was, did King Philip come over for great soup? Take a minute and make up your own. Use those letters, make up a saying, a question, a statement, a funny line, or something that has those letters in order. It's one of those weird things that most people memorize, but you want to know that idea of going from domain all the way down to species. Next, we use this classification system to organize every living organism. As you travel down the organizational chart, So again, talking from domain down to species, you narrow down how many characteristics organisms share. So things that are in the same domain share some characteristics, but things that are in the same order are going to share even more characteristics. And things that are in the same genus will share even more characteristics. So as you go down, you're narrowing down the characteristics and getting more and more specific. So there's 3 main domains. We're going to focus on one of them, but you want to have kind of an overview of all of them. So first is archaebacteria. So those are prokaryotic organisms, which means they lack a nucleus. They have DNA, but their DNA is not enclosed inside of a nuclear membrane. They are unicellular, which means they are made up of one single cell, and they're very simplistic. So archae means ancient. This is probably the first life on Earth was archaebacteria. And we call these archaebacteria extremophiles because they can survive in extreme environments, whether it's extreme salt, heat, acid, cold, and a lot of them can also survive without oxygen. So archaebacteria, probably the oldest bacteria out there, quite ancient, but they survive in very extreme environments. However, they are very simplistic. Next one is eubacteria. So these are prokaryotic still, so they don't have a nucleus, unicellular, single cells, but they're also very simplistic. The only difference between these first 2 groups is that they cannot survive in extreme environments. So they need much more moderate conditions in order to survive. The one we're going to focus on and that you know most of your organisms from is the eukarya. They are eukaryotic organisms, so they have a true nucleus. Their DNA is inside of a nuclear membrane. They're usually multicellular, but there is one exception, and they are way more complex. So we're going to focus on the domain of eukarya, and within eukarya there's 4 kingdoms. The first one is the one we belong to, Animalia. So they are eukaryotic, multicellular, and they're heterotrophic. So they consume their food. So like we talked about in class before, I can't go out and lay in the sun and get energy from that. I don't have chloroplasts in my cell. I'm not a photosynthetic organism. In order to get energy, I have to consume my food. So with Animalia, humans are a good example of this. Sorry if you can hear Cooper in the background. He's crying because it's almost dinner time. The next one is Plantae. So they are also eukaryotic and multicellular. The big difference here is they are autotrophic. They do photosynthesis. So grass, trees, bushes, anything like that. Next one is fungi. So they are eukaryotic, multicellular. They're heterotrophic like us, but unlike us, they don't consume and eat like we do traditionally. They rather absorb nutrients for their food. So when you think of like mushrooms leach their nutrients from the things that they are growing on. Last one is Protista. They are eukaryotic and mostly unicellular. So a good example of this is algae. If you remember looking at paramecium or amoeba at the beginning of the year under the microscope, those are also examples of Protista. So they're usually unicellular. They're the only unicellular one here. Going back to Animalia, don't just think of, sorry, Cooper. Don't just think of humans and like mammals for Animalia. These are anything that are eukaryotic, multicellular, and heterotrophic, consuming their food. So your insects, your amphibians, your reptiles, all of those are going to be considered Animalia. So by using taxonomy, we have been able to create a naming system that helps sort and show relationships and identify individual species. So that naming system is called binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. Bi means 2, and that means it's a 2-name naming system. It uses both the genus and the species. So some examples. Humans Our binomial nomenclature or scientific name is Homo sapien. Our genus is Homo. Our species is sapien. For a wolf, Canis lupus. So Canis is the genus, lupus is the species. I always think of Harry Potter with this one because I think of Sirius Black as like a wolf, and they call him lupus in that one. Panthera leo is lion. Okay, Panthera is the genus, Leo is the species. There's a couple rules when writing scientific names out or using binomial nomenclature. The first is with genus, it's always listed first, and the first letter is capitalized. So you'll see that in my examples here. The H of Homo sapien, Homo is our genus, it's listed first, H is capital. Oops. Second is species is always listed second, and it's never capitalized. Third, because they are scientific names, we usually write them in italics if we're typing, or if you're not typing, you would underline them if you're writing them out so that they stick out as a true scientific name. So before you finish this video, I have one more slide after this. I do want you to, before you submit the assignment, look up some of the examples. So just use Google and type in scientific name for these 4 things and see what you get. And keep in mind, we use these so that no matter if you're here in Europe or China, the scientific name is going to be consistent and the same throughout all countries. One hint on this domesticated dog one, domesticated dogs have subspecies, and so you will see 3 names on that one. So what do you need to do this week? So you watch this video, you submit your completed notes from it. Second, there is a quick, I think it's like 3-minute intro video on using dichotomous keys. So now that you know what a species is, how scientists figure out which species is which is often by using dichotomous keys. Then you'll do the dichotomous key activity. It won't take very long at all. It's about 10 minutes. And then try to attend one of our Google Meets on Tuesday or Wednesday. We'll play a little game, and then it'll be our usual 11 o'clock time. And then do double check you don't have any missing work during extended learning. I am going to probably at some point this week go through and put in zeros for things that people haven't done so that I can track where everybody's at. Because right now I just have grades for things that are completed. I don't have any grades for things that were not turned in. If you do get a 0, that doesn't mean you can't still go back and do something. So if I flag something as a 0 and you're like, I didn't see that, you can go in and finish it and still get full credit. So let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I will see you during our Google Meets.